So, when you hear the word blonde, what comes to mind? Probably airheads, clueless, not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. Unfortunate stereotypes, sure, but hey, Moses supposes his toes are roses and all that. But back in the 80s though, blonde meant something very different to me. Thanks to guys like Luke Skywalker, Captain America, Hulk Hogan, and He-Man, blonde wasn't a punchline. It meant being a leader. So on my very first trip to Toys R Us, staring at a wall of real American heroes, wondering which one to get, I went with what felt like the obvious choice. The first blonde dude I spotted. And in theory, as far as Joes were concerned, that was perfectly sound reasoning, not too far off from the truth. Except instead of walking out with the team's fearless commander, I ended up bringing home the wrong blonde. Now, I'm sure that for all of you awesome viewers living in the US, blondes are like a dime a dozen. But for a little Asian boy born and raised in the Philippines, seeing a natural blonde in person was about as rare as spotting a unicorn. And no, this guy doesn't count. But to drive my point, this dude, Redford White, was a local actor and comedian who gained popularity mostly because of his blonde hair. The reason I bring this up is that unlike the tired stereotype of blondes being simple-minded or empty-headed, growing up I saw them as something more exotic, even heroic, thanks to characters like Luke Skywalker, the farm boy from Tatooine with a greater destiny as a Jedi, or the star-spangled Avengers assembling Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, or the very tanned but still definitely blonde most powerful man in the universe, He-Man. Blonde dudes weren't jokes, they were leaders, the main characters, and the heroes of their stories. And so during my very first trip to the US, and more importantly, my very first visit to the hallowed halls of Toys R Us, I found myself staring at a wall of real American heroes. And being given the difficult choice of just picking one, I naturally used my light-haired logic and went with the first blonde I saw. Surely, he had to be the leader. Unfortunately, I was way off. Despite my lofty intentions, I didn't walk out with the face of G.I. Joe. Instead, I ended up with Short Fuse. Now, no offense to any Short Fuse fans out there, but as a chosen one, he felt more like, well, skeleton boogers. That being said, my blonde ambitious reasoning wasn't completely wrong because at the time, the actual leader of G.I. Joe was blonde. He just wasn't sold as a single-carded figure like most of the team. Instead, Hasbro packed him in with the Mobile Missile System, or MMS for short, which honestly was kind of a puzzling decision if you ask me. See, aside from the added articulation and accessories, which was already a huge game changer, one of the big things Hasbro did to set G.I. Joe apart from its main predecessor, Star Wars, was to pack unique characters in with their vehicles. But as a kid, I always saw these pack-in figures more as second-class citizens of the line. Like, if they were really that important, they would have been sold on their own card, right? Which made Hasbro's decision to release the leader of the G.I. Joe team, Hawk, as a pack-in with the MMS, a vehicle that, let's be honest, wasn't exactly the most exciting of the first wave. Even stranger. Hasbro didn't even go out of their way to advertise him as the leader. His file card simply listed his role as Missile Commander. And only in the very last line of his file card did it finally state that he was an excellent leader. Talk about burying the lead. I remember the first time I actually got my hands on Hawk and the MMS. Technically, the toy wasn't mine. It was given to my older brother in what must have been one of those parental attempts at teaching us siblings how to play together. I ended up with the Vamp and its driver, Clutch, which in hindsight, I guess they hoped I would use to haul around my brother's missile system. But honestly, I wasn't too upset because I always felt like I scored the cooler deal. I mean, Clutch had the better ride, and he oozed personality. Well, actually, that was most likely the motor oil he used to slick back his hair. He also called women chicks, and came off like the Joe with the most swagger. In my book, that made him way cooler than Missile Commander Hawk. And if you thought otherwise, well, bless your heart. Regardless of my less than glowing first impression of Hawk though, looking back as an adult, I believe that I can actually make sense of his unusual debut in the line. Sure, toys like the Vamp, the MOBAT tank, or even the Ram cycle were way more exciting to play with. But in the real world, all of their combined firepower would most likely pale compared to a long-range missile system. The MMS might not have looked flashy, but it represented something far more devastating, a weapon that could take out key Cobra targets from a distance. So it would make sense that someone of Hawk's caliber was assigned to command it. His file card paints a picture of, well, the cat's pajamas. Arguably the most accomplished Joe on the roster at the time. Born Clayton M. Abernathy, he came from a well-established, really loaded family. But instead of rock and rolling all night and partying every day, he went the hard route, spending his days in La Biblioteca, becoming a West Point graduate, top of his class, and a seasoned soldier with experience in multiple global hot zones. And on top of all that, Hawk wasn't just book smart and battle tested. He was described as keenly intelligent, perceptive, and capable of completely selfless acts to support his teammates. Basically, if you were going to entrust one Joe to oversee the Army's equivalent of a tactical nuke on wheels, Hawk was your man. Now, while the toy line wasn't all that clear about Hawk's status as the leader of the team, the comics left no doubt he was the man in charge. From issue number 1 of Marvel's G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero, Hawk is firmly established as the team's field commander. The guy calling the shots, being prominently featured in the first issue cover, fearlessly leaping off the MOBAT tank, and also on the top right corner box. But Hawk's story in the comics actually begins even earlier, before the team's official debut. During the Vietnam War era, Hawk was stationed stateside and found himself with one of the hardest duties imaginable. When a young injured soldier returned home, Hawk was the one tasked with breaking the news that his entire family had been killed in a car crash on their way to pick him up. That soldier would go on to be Hasbro's top money-making Joe, Snake Eyes, and Hawk's compassion in that moment forged a lifelong bond between them. And speaking of lifelong bonds, while I'm not delusional into thinking I can form lifelong bonds with every single one of you awesome viewers, how about we start out small, with something more manageable, lifelong watch time. Okay, I'll settle for extended watch time. If you're enjoying this video, why not give other stories on my channel a shot? Apparently, keeping all you entertained for longer amounts of time is what actually helps my channel out big time. So yeah, just keep watching more of my videos. Heck, keep me babbling about in the background while you go about your day, and you will really make mine. But as always, any way you choose to help would be very much appreciated, so thank you. Now, Hawk Tua, the show. Okay, I'm sorry. That was a pretty lame transition. So, anyway, years later, Hawk would command a peacekeeping mission in the war-torn nation of Barovia. And it's here that a sergeant under his charge, Lonzo Stalker Wilkinson, resorted to extreme interrogation methods to stop a bombing in a refugee camp. Hawk refused to turn him over, even though that decision nearly cost him everything. Hawk openly admitted Stalker's actions were wrong, but insisted that he would have done the same in his place, placing the responsibility squarely on his own shoulders. That principled stand earned Hawk a court-martial and painted a target on his back, as his furious commanding general went so far as to hire mercenaries to have him killed. Fortunately, Hawk's resolve didn't go unnoticed. Another highly decorated officer, General Lawrence J. Flagg, intervened, threatening to expose the murder plot unless the charges were dropped. More importantly, Flagg, flagged Hawk as the man he wanted to lead his new special counter-terrorist group Delta, codenamed G.I. Joe. Promoted to field commander, Hawk's first recruit was Stalker, and together they helped bring in Snake Eyes and the rest of the original 13, who would form the backbone of America's daring, highly trained special mission force. And the rest, you could say, is history. From here, Hawk, as the G.I. Joe's no-nonsense, hard-nosed leader, really takes shape on the comic page. As field commander, he led the Joes through some of their earliest and most dangerous missions, often right on the front lines himself. And this nearly cost him his own life in issue number 16, when in the middle of a desperate brawl with Destro on the back of his tank, Cobra Commander shoots Hawk. But despite multiple bullets in his back and falling off the speeding tank, somehow, Hawk survived. Okay, fine, he was wearing a SWAT vest, but still, that's gotta hurt. Anyway, even while hospitalized, he refused to be sidelined, holding on to his holster and firearm, which ultimately proved to be quite fictitious. When Cobra mercenary Major Blood tried to escape custody through the very same hospital, Hawk was the one who foiled him, proving that command didn't stop just because you're heavily bandaged up. Unfortunately, despite Hawk's maximum effort, that slippery rascal Major Blood would ultimately manage to escape a few issues later, but not before murdering General Flag, leaving a devastating leadership void at the top of the Joe team. Once Hawk fully recovered, he was promoted to overall commander of G.I. Joe, with the newly introduced Golden Boy, Duke, stepping in as the team's field leader. And speaking of Duke, his starring role in the very first animated miniseries meant Hawk was essentially benched in the cartoon for the time being. Hasbro's reasoning was simple. By the time the series aired, Hawk's MMS toy had long disappeared from the shelves, while Duke was front and center as the new blonde of the brand. Still, while Hawk was a non-entity in the early cartoons, his story continued in the comics. There, he often fought the good fight in the background, not just against Cobra, but against political pressure from corrupt generals determined to shut the Joe team down. Speaking of which, during a crucial inspection of the G.I. Joe headquarters, the Pit, Hawk meets with three high-ranking military officers, Generals Ryan and Hollingsworth, and Admiral Dyson, where deep inside the pit, they are attacked by a horde of Cobra Battle Android Troopers, or BATs. With the rest of the Joe team temporarily quartered off-site, the four are left to fend for themselves and put up a devastating fight, destroying many androids. Unfortunately, General Ryan and Admiral Dyson die in the battle, sacrificing themselves to save the others. But the surviving general, Hollingsworth, puts all his influence behind Hawk, saving the Joe team from being decommissioned. But Hawk wasn't destined to stay in the shadows forever. In 1986, he made a triumphant return with an all-new action figure, trading his original blonde look for brown hair, likely to distinguish him from Duke. And sporting green camo pants, a sharp brown bomber jacket, and goggled helmet ensemble. Now officially a brigadier general, this updated Hawk was given a major push in the cartoon as well, making his animated debut in the miniseries Arise Serpentor Arise. And despite other high-ranking Joes like Flint and Beachhead already being fixtures on the team, Hawk was firmly established at the top, with his authority spelled out right from the opening episode, care of Flint. Hawk's return to prominence in Arise Serpentor Arise wasn't the end of his animated journey. In the 1987 G.I. Joe the movie, he was positioned as the steady hand at the top while new blood like Lieutenant Falcon took center stage. Now, here's a fun bit of trivia. Falcon was originally intended to be Hawk's son, which is why their bird of prey codenames line up so neatly. Ultimately though, that family relation went to Duke, with Falcon becoming his half-brother. After the Sunbow era wrapped, Hawk was one of the fortunate, or is that unfortunate characters carried over into the Deke series. Though not without some radical wardrobe changes, thanks to a couple more new Hawk figures released at the time. In 1991, Hawk was equipped with a high-tech flight suit that, aside from giving off some strong Buzz Lightyear vibes, let him literally live up to his codename as a Hawk and soar into battle. A year later, a more traditional version hit shelves, wearing shades and carrying a comically oversized backpack that barked out pre-recorded lines. Let's see, I had 3 when I came in. But Hawk's wildest animated adventure came much later, in the 2004 direct-to-video movie G.I. Joe Valor vs. Venom. Here, Cobra abducted the Joe commander and subjected him to Dr. Mindbender's evolution experiments, splicing his DNA into the monstrous hybrid Venomous Maximus. Towering, savage, and disturbingly cunning, Maximus nearly usurped Cobra Commander himself, before ultimately being freed and restored to humanity by the Joe team. It was one of the darkest and strangest turns in Hawk's long history, underscoring just how important he was to both Cobra and G.I. Joe alike. But Hawk's return didn't just play out in the cartoons. In the comics, his story continued to evolve well beyond his animated appearances. In Devil's Due's continuation of the Marvel run, Hawk found himself once again butting heads with the corrupt generals known as the Jugglers, a reoccurring thorn in his side, and his career nearly came to an end when Cobra Commander, who turned out to actually be Zartan in disguise, shot him point blank, leaving Hawk paralyzed from the waist down. Despite being confined to a wheelchair, Hawk refused to fade into the background, returning to the Joe team in an advisory and reservist role, still guiding the fight against Cobra from behind the lines. And while I generally don't go in too much on alternate universes, I think that it's at least worth mentioning that in Devil's Due's take on a G.I. Joe vs. Transformers crossover, Hawk got one of the wildest moments ever. He actually managed to activate and wield the Autobot Matrix of Leadership, using its power to defeat the bizarre Decepticon Cobra love child known as Serpent OR. Anyway, after that otherworldly take on Hawk, later incarnations, specifically in the IDW comics, gave Hawk a sharper, more pragmatic edge. No longer just the idealized field commander of old, Hawk was reimagined as a seasoned, sometimes morally gray general who understood the bigger picture, even if it meant making tough or unpopular calls, and sending his own men into extremely dangerous, top secret, and clandestine missions that they more often than not don't come back from. In this continuity, Hawk was far from the frontline fighter of old and more of a strategist pulling the strings, often clashing with other leaders over how best to deal with Cobra and the shifting global landscape. This version of Hawk reflected a post-9/11 world where the lines between right and wrong weren't always as clear, and it cemented him as not just a soldier, but a symbol of leadership evolving with the times. Although a cynic would be quick to point out that, ironically, this modern version of Hawk would end up becoming one of those jaded and secretive generals that the original, more idealistic version of Hawk would constantly battle against. Admittedly, it's not my preferred treatment of the guy, but you know what they say, if you can't be good at it. And well, this Hawk was
pretty good
at being shady. But it wasn't all darkness and morally gray takes for Hawk in the modern era. In 2009's live-action movie G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, Hawk was reintroduced on the big screen, portrayed by Dennis Quaid as the commanding general of the Joe team. While nothing out of the ordinary, Quaid's take on Hawk is a more back-to-basics but seasoned combat veteran calling the shots for the G.I. Joe team from deep within their pit headquarters, and constantly accompanied by his loyal aide, Covergirl, played by the model Karolina Kurkova. Unfortunately, despite being stationed at the heart of G.I. Joe HQ, during a Cobra surprise attack, Hawk is still gravely injured by the ninja Storm Shadow, but he ultimately survives. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Covergirl, who is gutted by Zartan. And that would be pretty much it. Even if he didn't die, for whatever reason, Hawk would not return in the sequel, Retaliation, with his senior commanding officer role being taken over by the original G.I. Joe, Joe Colton, played by Bruce Willis. Oh well, at least this single live appearance did give us a couple more movie-based Hawk toys. I mean, if you wanted a plastic Dennis Quaid for your collection, have at it. And speaking of the toys, let's finish things up with other Hawk toys released through the years. Aside from the previously mentioned ones earlier, one more unique Hawk figure would be released in the original Real American Hero line in 1993. And when I say unique, boy did this Hawk look nothing like any Hawks before or after it. Released as part of the Star Brigade Armor Tech subset, this Hawk was hella armored up, looking twice the size, at least in width, as your typical 3 3/4 inch Joe. And if that wasn't enough, he came packed with a humongous G.I. Joe armor bot. Yeah, Hasbro was really desperate for anything to work at this point. Anyways, s'more Hawks came as part of the 25th anniversary line. A young blonde Hawk that came in a comic 2-pack with Scarlet. A more seasoned but still young and still blonde version was also part of the senior ranking officers 3-pack with Duke and Grunt. Okay. And of course, it wouldn't be a complete 25th anniversary party without an updated take on his arguably most iconic look from 1986. First released single-carded in 2008, and then as part of a special 5-pack along with Flint, Lady J, Shipwreck, and Snake Eyes. And before the 25th anniversary revival would end, we would get one more new take on Hawk as part of the awesome Pursuit of Cobra line in 2011, which was apparently so good that it was re-released in a later Eagle's Edge set with Destro and Leatherneck, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the original line, not the Real American Hero one, in 2014. And bringing up the rear would be the Collectors Club in 2017, with their take on the Hawk Lightyear figure, originally released in 1991. And finally, let's finish off this Hawk story with his latest plastic appearance, this time in the larger 6-inch size. I guess it wasn't much of a surprise that we didn't have to wait too long for Hawk to make his appearance in the G.I. Joe Classified line. In 2023, we got the Bombardier jacket sporting Brigadier General version of Hawk, which was, well, exactly what you would expect. No complaints here, especially since I was able to get this guy on clearance. But I guess to bring things in full circle, earlier this year Hasbro announced the imminent release of the OG version of Hawk, the young blonde that came with a mobile missile system, and who now will also come with an appropriately sized mobile missile system. To be honest though, I'm kind of on the fence on this one since I've already got the previous Hawk already leading my OG-13 Oh, who am I kidding? This guy is as good as bought. And speaking of being bought, I guess you could say that this dude could be bought by just about anyone, for the right price, that is. If you want to know more about the mercenary Zartan and his mercenary siblings, I've got their story here. Or if you want to check out my latest story, you can find it over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Go ahead and tell me your story.